Good morning and welcome to today's webinar, a deep dive into Microsoft Teams native integration with an Enghouse contact center. I'm Astrid Pocklington. I'm a marketing manager at Enghouse Interactive and I will be your host for today's webinar, the first of our Microsoft Teams Tech Clinics. It's hard to believe that it's been 6 years since Microsoft released Teams on the 14th of March in 2017. The pandemic accelerated its recognition and adoption, and this year Teams actually surpassed 280 million monthly active users. Microsoft continues to deliver new features for Teams, and in the contact center industry, we talk to new professionals almost every week looking to migrate their contact center to Teams. So in today's session, we will look more closely at running a natively integrated contact center on the Teams platform. I'm very happy to welcome Peter Fedarb and Dave McDowell, both solutions consultants here at Enghouse Interactive and globally respected members of our technical team for a long time by now. So 24 years in Dave's case, and I believe Pete has been with us for almost 18 years. So both have a huge depth of contact center experience achieved in a variety of roles. So I'm very pleased to have them both here today to share their deep knowledge on contact center integration. Good morning, both.
Thanks, Astrid. Hi.
So before we kick off, I need to get a few housekeeping announcements out of the way. So the webinar will be recorded and shared with you afterwards. You can ask questions during the session, and I'll quickly show you how to do that. All you need to do is click on the little arrow to expand the control panel. Then you scroll down to the questions section, type in your question and hit send. So Pete and Dave will go through the questions at the end, and in case we don't have time to address all those questions, we will follow up during our second Microsoft Teams Tech Clinic in 2 weeks' time. Before I hand over to Pete, I think it would be useful to get an understanding of where our audience is in their Teams journey. So let's do a quick poll. So if our audience could please answer the following question. Have you already integrated Microsoft Teams with your contact center? The options are yes, and we are very happy with the outcome. Yes, but we are not seeing the benefits we had hoped for. No, or we are planning to do so within the next 12 months. So if you could please take your pick. Just waiting a little bit longer to give everybody a chance to vote. Okay. Let's have a look at the results. Pete and Dave, what do you make of this result?
I think it's pretty typical there, Astrid, with a lot of people have already moved to Teams. There's a mixed bag that haven't moved to Teams yet. They're interested in doing so, and some that are planning but waiting background just for things to evolve a little bit further. So it's typically for what we see in the marketplace. I think who we have on the call is the general mixture that we do find in the field. But that number of transitioning to Teams for the top two answers would be, evolving every day with what we're transitioning customers. I would imagine that, that number's going to increase. If we did the same poll next year, I would imagine that number would have probably nearly doubled.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's dig a bit deeper and find out what's holding organizations back. So our second question is, what is your main reservation around integrating your contact center with Microsoft Teams? Is it integration complexity, disruption to contact center operations, perhaps it's limited resources or cost restrictions, or indeed a lack of internal knowledge. So if you could please pick the answer that is most appropriate to your circumstances. Okay, it's pretty much neck on neck at the moment. Will be interesting. Just giving it a little bit longer. Okay. Let's take a look. Okay, Pete, are you surprised at all?
No, I think that the integration complexity is a fair one. Quite a lot of people look at the existing methods that are there, and there's architecture that they possibly don't want to have longer term. Some of them are waiting for the right time to minimize the disruption to the contact center. So I think both of those comments are fair for those that are holding back. You know, probably the surprising one, the 19% of lack of the internal knowledge. I think this is why we're doing these sorts of sessions today, is because we're trying to inform everybody in the marketplace where things is. It's an evolving story. And I think it's very hard for the customer base to keep pace of where everything's at and what the new evolutions will be. And hopefully some of that knowledge will be imparted today, and we'll try and answer any questions. And if you feel you do have a lack of knowledge, if today's session isn't you know, answering all the direct questions that you have, we do have a second follow-up session to ask more questions. Or if you reach back out to us, we're more than happy to have a private session with you where we can demonstrate or tackle your needs on exactly where you feel that knowledge gap is.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Pete. And without further ado, I shall be handing over to you.
Okay, so I'm just going to turn my camera off, guys, just so that the content, the video sometimes sort of minimizes down the content. So I'm just going to hopefully give you the full benefit of the information that we have today. So if you're new to Enghouse, we provide contact center solutions, and we have sort of a core contact center application, and there's lots of modulars or modules that we can add in around that. We also provide a layer of services and professional services and bolt-on applications to the contact center as well, so we can do sort of a best fit solution for yourself. So there's quite a lot of things that we do cover, and we're quite knowledgeable in that area. And there's no harm in having a conversation. It doesn't cost anybody to talk. So if there's things that you are interested in, feel free to reach out to us. Where people are talking to us as Enghouse, realistically, is we have got 15 years of co-development partnership with Microsoft. We've been a member of their TAP programs back in the OCS days, which predated the sort of Link and Skype for Business that are more commonly known. And obviously we're in the TAP programs for the Microsoft Teams as well. We do get asked to co-present at events like Microsoft Expire and Microsoft Ignite. And really, we have been on this journey from the OCS in 2008 up through Link, up through Skype, all the way through to the Teams integrations that we've had in the last few years. And we'll be taking a look at what's been evolving over here in the next few slides anyway. So if we were to take a look at sort of really where Microsoft sits in the marketplace, in the Microsoft side of things, they're really covering that back office user solution with voice, presence, collaboration, emails, for example, that are there. However, Microsoft don't currently offer a contact center for Teams. Therefore, third parties really have to fill that gap. And this is where Enghouse will fill in the contact center side of it, but using the underpinning Teams technology wherever possible that we can do. And that's where we're adding these extra elements into that solution so that you've got both your UC and your contact center and possible console requirements as well filled. So you're filling up those user gaps that are there. Microsoft isn't a one-stop shop for all of your sort of, telephony needs, if you like. There are those outlying products that we will require. So people are often asked why, to move your contact center to Teams. So I'll give some feedback that myself and Dave get on a regular basis talking to customers. customers are really looking to enhance their mobility. And a lot of this more was driven by COVID, that there's a more request from the workplace to be able to work remotely. Everybody's been asking that question for the last 5 years, but very few of the population were actually doing it, even though customers were getting sort of prepared for it. And due to COVID, everybody had to work from home from that environment, and a lot of people initially switched teams, to get away from on-premise PBX and be able to connect through the home broadband and still work for it at that point. But we've got more customers now that sort of survive the COVID experience, if you'd like to put it that way. And what they're really more interested in now is more a hybrid, flexible working environment where users may be asked to come to the office a couple of days a week, but want to be working from home. And that, of course, with the Teams experience is not a problem, if you like, with the UC for the back office users that are within there. However, the contact center is getting those same requests, and therefore, it's offering that flexible working and being able to fit in what the needs are of the employee population are these days. The other side that people are looking for is the real-time collaboration teams. The back office can work more cooperatively with the contact center, doing things like screen shares. So it's not just having to phone that person, having a dialogue. You can screen share information. There's the ask a question by chat. Using those type of technologies are really sort of more expected as part of that sort of use experience these days. And unfortunately, some of those traditional on-premise PBX vendors, they are lacking in that environment. Some of them do have sort of soft phones and those sorts of things where you can collaborate, but there's quite a lot that are still sort of phone-based, or their applications really aren't as widespread as what the Teams experience will give you. Obviously, the other thing that businesses are looking for is everybody's sort of feeling the hit to the wallet these days is reduction in cost is what is perceived. So people look at their Office 365 licensing and they're really saying, well, I get majority of what I need included within there. Sometimes you might have to add in the extra sort of PBX license, if you like, to it to enable the enterprise voice. However, a lot of people are looking at that as being a lot more cheaper than it is to actually maintain the on-premise PBXs and technologies that are there. So really, to nail it into 3 topics is really about that mobility, being able to collaborate better, and also, being more cost effective for the business are the main drivers that we see. A lot of people are sort of saying, I keep hearing about sort of SIP integration and native integration, and SIP is where basically the contact center is bolted on, or explain how it's bolted onto Teams, but it's sort of driving the calls from external into the Teams environment, which was a little bit different to what was happening within the Skype for Business world. We were driving the actual Skype for Business environment, not sort of feeding calls into it. And therefore, what's special about the native integration is what most people are looking for is that reduction in infrastructure, that complexity that we picked up in the poll there. What we're looking to do is to get away from having to have a direct routing SBC. I want to simplify it. I want to put everything through my carriers. I want to make it as slick and cost effective as I can do for the business. The other side is that when you're using the SIP integration, all your users really have to be enterprise voice. If you want a contact center agent to answer a call, they need to have that additional voice license that enables a DDI and external contact. And also anybody that they want to transfer through to. So if we're looking at an operator solution, for example, at this point in time, an operator will transfer to most people within the business. So they're going to need some form of DDI to be able to transfer, because the contact center lives outside of the Teams environment. It's not going to be able to make an internal call to it. So for some organizations, there is quite a cost in doing that SIP integration around that licensing there. But when we move to the native model, we'll see how that will be done, that we won't possibly need that unless you absolutely need a DDI and some external contact for the agent. Also, one of the limitations of doing SIP integration is that you have to pretty much use your own carrier. If you want to put a contact center in there, you can't use the Microsoft PSTN, and you must use the direct routing method there. But some people want to say, I want a one-stop shop and put my PSTN via sort of Microsoft. I quite like their idea of the call plans. That's what I want to do for my size of organization. But having the sort of contact center or operator console being sort of external to Teams, we can't put the calls into the Microsoft environment, bring them out and put them back in again. So it does limit your choice of PSTN as well. The thing that's really special about the native integration is the future direction of Microsoft. And these APIs have been evolving for a few years, and probably everyone in the marketplace would argue a little bit longer than what we'd expect from Microsoft. The COVID times probably slowed that down a little bit around that development, and the way that Teams sort of expanded so heavily in that time, really that sort of took the focus away from them developing those APIs to increasing platform and making sure that they were ramping up at some point, 200% in 3 months. So at that point, they had a lot of work on their plate to keep the world running with the amount of people switching over. So what we're going to do is take a look at the moment of how Microsoft integration would work for the SIP integration, which has been available since Teams was released. And this is pretty much not unique to us at Enghouse. This is pretty much how any standard contact center would bolt into that environment. So we have our PSTN, and for those that don't understand what direct routing is, that's where realistically your calls will come to an SBC, which is just a sort of almost a security device, if you like, and a routing device that will sit within your network, or possibly could be hosted by a partner for you, for example. But the calls will come to the PSTN, and then its job is to forward it up to the Teams cloud. So it's bringing your own carrier to the SBC, and then that goes up to the Teams cloud. And we have to use this model because the way the calls logically work is an external caller will call to the SBC. If it was a normal standard Teams call, that would just get passed through straight up to the cloud to make the client ring. But in the contact center world, the SBC has to push the call across to the EICC server. So there's a SIP trunk required here so that the call can be passed. What the EICC is doing at this point is introducing a conference here so that we can say, thanks for calling Enghouse, press 1 for support, press 2 for service, for example. And at that point, what we're really doing is using the Teams Presence APIs to understand who's available in the agent environment. Are they on a direct call? Are they not on a direct call? Are they available to take a call? Once we identify the agent we want to send the call to, the conferencing unit on our system actually makes a call back to the SBC. The SBC will route that up to the Teams environment, and the person's Teams client will actually ring. And obviously, our agent interface will provide that supplementary information about which queue it's from, how long the person waited within the system. So as you can see, although this is integration to Teams, it's all working within the Teams environment. This piece is very, very external to the actual Teams environment that's there. So that's how SIP integration has been working. There's not a problem with SIP integration. We have lots and lots of customers using it. It's just things are evolving, and we're moving through to what is referred to as native integration. Some people may call this the calling API, is what they refer to the API set that's used behind here. And we're all talking about the same thing there, but to break it down into what's happening at that point, we've now simplified the solution. The SBC has disappeared. We've got, we could have an SBC, or it could be done at carrier level, but the contact center isn't dependent on an SBC anymore. So if we want to do a direct routing for other reasons, you're entitled to do that. You can do it at the carrier level. If you want to use Microsoft PSTN, for example, you can use that as well. Because when the call comes into the Teams cloud, we don't mind how it gets there. We're not dependent on that connectivity. Because what's going to happen is within this Teams cloud, we're creating what's referred to as Azure QBots. And it's a very sort of technical term, not very self-explanatory, but the QBots are the name that Microsoft give it. It's got for business. If you had that type of environment, it would have been called a CS Trusted Application Endpoint. They've shortened the name a little bit, but it's no more or less complex. I like to call it just a virtual user. So a virtual user will get assigned a SIP address, a Teams address within there. You'd attach a telephone number for it. So when I phone that telephone number, it's actually going to trigger an activity to this virtual user. And the virtual user's job will be to call a callback URI, which basically says, I need some input from an external source, and that external source being the contact center. So using the calling API set, it's going to make a HTTPS or HTTP call across to the Enghouse server there to say, I've got a call for you to deal with. The call is placed into a standard Microsoft Teams meeting, a conference, if you like. So that conferencing that we were doing on the actual communication server before is now being done natively within Teams, exactly the same as a Teams conference would look, and all those meetings that many of us would have joined. So whilst we're in that conference bridge at that point in time, we've got the ability to stream the announcements through to it. So we can still play the thank you for calling Enghouse. We can listen for that DTMF, press 1 or press 2 for your support service, so we can listen to that response. We can play the music on hold through to them. And we're going to use the same presence APIs to detect whether the users that are there. Now, just like we did from the conferences that were on the server of the Enghouse server before, we're now going to ask the teams to invite the agent into the meeting. So that invite now doesn't have to use the agent's DDI, which it did within the SIP experience before. So what we would actually be able to do now is to use their Teams address, the UPN address, if you like, the username acronym, and we can invite them. So in doing this, you don't actually have to have enterprise voice enabled, that extra phone system license, if you like, enabled for that agent to join that conference, because anybody internally can join the Microsoft conference. So this is where that license drop may happen for some customers. You can decide, do I need that DDI for the agent? A reason why you might need that DDI for the agent is if you want them to have a DDI for them to take direct calls. If it's going to be an inbound contact center call, we can operate that through the conferences and they'll be able to receive the calls. If we were going to do this for an outbound call, well, what we would do is when they dial out from our application, they say, I'd like to make a call out. What we do is to place a call to the agent first, they click accept, and then it makes a call out to their telephone number. And it's all held within a conference as well. So again, we've made an internal call to the agent. The conference is dialing out to the outside world. The agent actually isn't. So at that point in time, they only need to be an internal agent. They're just joining a conference that is got an external party or going to bring in an external party. So this does actually reduce the sort of possible within the contact center, and people like operators, you could choose whether you want to elevate that license. But also when this agent wants to transfer to somebody in the back office, the conference is going to invite that person into the conference. So at that point in time, that back office user that I'm transferring to, they will not require a license to be transferred to by an operator or by an agent, which is different to the SIP integration. And if you think of an operator transferring to everybody there, that could be impact on lots of people needing that additional license that don't need that external communication. So you might have somebody, a team in accounts, for example, that are just using a call group, a hunt group within the cloud. They don't really need a DDI. If there's 10 of those, that phone system license could save, around about sort of 90, 100 pounds, depending on what your license model is, a month on that actual sort of, cost around there. So if you think of that on a scale for a larger business, that could add up to quite a lot of licensing saved there. So that's why some of the larger customers are starting to look into this model, because they can reduce the costs or not incur the cost when setting up a new system that's there. So the big real difference is things are starting to work 100% inside this Teams environment. Therefore, if it's working within the Teams environment, Teams is hosted within Microsoft's data center, which we all know as Azure. I like to call it Microsoft's data center because it simplifies what Azure is. And therefore, it makes a lot of sense that, hosting applications within Azure, like our server, you've got your Azure instance there, or we could host it within Azure for you. Basically, this means that you're keeping everything as close as you can do. You could actually still put this into a traditional data center if you wanted to, or in an on-premise server if you wanted to. As long as it has the connectivity to make a web call to the Microsoft Cloud, basic internet sort of traffic, if you like, the solution would actually work. But by hosting it within Azure, all of this communication is running across the Microsoft Azure backbone, which realistically means you're reducing those points of failure. Nothing is leaving Azure, everything's running through that Azure data center that's there. So hopefully that explains a little bit more around the native calling API that we have today. And the major differences are things are starting to move internally. For those that may have been aware how the integration was done within the Skype for Business environment, is actually this is moving back to more how we would have worked with Microsoft Skype back in the day. In the Microsoft Skype, this would have been the front-end server that did the Skype conferencing, and we would have been controlling conferencing. So this isn't quite a whole new concept from Microsoft. It's just when they developed the multi-tenant cloud platform, they really had to think about how they released these APIs so that it could be used by mass without sort of taking the system down. If they did it in the same way as the sort of Skype with one API, it probably would have caused sort of major bottlenecks within their network. So what they've actually done is to split these APIs up into different ones, and this one they've just been a little bit slow to market with. Obviously, everyone's saying, great, that's a perfect world, when can I have it? We're not quite there yet, and we have to do the good, the bad, and the ugly, as I like to call it. There are some limitations for the current native integration, and the sort of current limitations are, if I pop back to the original slide, are not about getting the call to the cloud. They're not about us doing the announcements or playing music on hold or delivering the call through to the agent. The actual, what we see as gaps at the moment is if the agent starts to transfer to the back office, or if the operator is transferring to the back office, which is a key operator function. Some of the sort of examples around it is that if I was to transfer as the agent to an external party like Dave, for example. So the caller's called in, I'm going to transfer to Dave. It's going to show Dave on Dave's screen, Pete is calling you. However, when I hang that call up and put the caller through, the system should be updated. The Teams interface that Dave's looking at should be updated to say, here's the external customer's telephone number that you're looking at. Therefore, at the current way, the back office user will just see that they're talking to me for the entirety of the call. So when the handover is done, it's not going to update the number. There's just some limitations that we can't get it to obey when we push out this secondary sort of call to say the call parties have changed. It's not obeying that. There's also some limitations around that user if they're not available, for example. When we push and invite that call, it will ring on that user. It won't follow a call forward. So if I've got a call forward set to my mobile, my voicemail, for example, it won't follow that forward. And that's just the limitations because we're using the conferencing here to pass that through, that there are some challenges around sort of changing the parties, getting the call to act like a normal call because you're invited into a conference. So realistically, we were looking at that, and when I've been having the discussions with customers, is it about the right time for you to move? One of the things that we're conscious about talking about customers if they're interested in moving to the native integration is how much interaction happens between your contact center and the back office. So if you're a business where the contact center pretty much run independently, they sort of make a few and odd calls to the back office, but they're not really dependent on it, then the native integration is probably fit for you at this point in time. But if I was talking to a vertical market, let's say something like a local government, for example, their contact centers deal with a lot of different things and they have to reach out to those other departments. They're very, very dependent on it. And some of these little nuances there will have an impact on the user experience. Now, if they particularly wanted to go Teams today, I'd recommend, well, go native now and let's have the SIP integration now, and let's go native at the right time for you. Because, as I said, this is a journey that we're doing and things are happening all the time. So what are we actually doing in the next steps with that integration is really what we're going to be doing is we have a contact center application. But what we were being allowed to do is to take the underlying phone system layer from the actual sort of Teams itself and build that into our client. So we would have all sort of seen that on the Microsoft Teams journey that you could have an application on the phone, you can have an application on your PC, and you can run the Teams client on either. What we're actually doing is making our agent interface a bona fide Teams client in its own right. And what that really does is in building these sort of more client-side APIs into that technology is going to give us better control. So what we're really going to be able to do is to change this a little bit. When the calls are coming in the conference tier, when that agent wants to transfer, rather than invite them into the conference bridge, what we can do is to phone them and make the transfer directly from here. One of the limitations well, that Teams has is they didn't have the client APIs in the same way that Skype did. Therefore, we are heavily reliant on the conferencing. But these ACSs is a slightly different thing, that rather than us talking locally to the Teams client as we would in Scope Business, we can be a Teams client in our own right. And that's how Microsoft has chosen to release their sort of local API set for the client machine. So by embedding the underlying Teams there, our contact center will be able to act and call upon everything that a normal Teams user will be able to do. So by initiating the transfer here, we'll be able to solve those problems of making it a non-contact center call at that point in time, and we can still control the handoff because the call leg is really coming through here, and then the call will be joined through this path here. So really, it's about a question, if you're looking in about moving to Teams, it is a recommendation to have a regular dialogue, even if you don't think it's for you today. I tend to sort of talk to customers around about every 3 to every 6 months, depending on what their timelines are, around where things are at today. Because Microsoft are working hard doing things on the actual calling APIs. We're planning to do things on the ACS APIs to bring them in. So our first generation release on this will be our version 14, which is going to be Q3. The target for that is the end of August current. So if everything goes to plan, we should have our release for that at the end of August. And that will be where we bring in this, particularly to solve those first initial issues that are there. But this is actually going to do a lot more for us because we're going to be an independent sort of Teams client in our own right. It's going to give us easy access to things to promote the calls to Teams chats, to Teams video escalations. So if you've got internal calls happening within the business or from federated partners, for example, to councils working together, they're making that Teams to Teams connection that's there. Then that sort of promotion to chat video becomes a whole lot easier for us to do. And that will be the next stage that we start to look at there. There's also a future beyond that as well, because there's a lot more that we can do within the Teams conferencing here. We can actually start within the conferencing unit here. We're just talking about voice at that point in time, but we can start to bring smarts to it without needing to use external services to do that. So a call could come into the conference, and rather than having a simple press 1, press 2 IVR there, we could be using Microsoft speech to text and text to speech applications to actually do a enrollment IVR, for example, to do a customer identification, to gather some data, perhaps do some self-service at that layer. And everyone's going to say, but Pete, you've done that for 20 years. And I'm going to say, yes, I have, but it's this server here that's actually been done that. What there will be is a lot of access resources that you can push in from the Teams environment, which means that you can easily just drop in an application into your sort of Microsoft Teams tenancy that's there to say, I want to run this scripting across my conferences. It doesn't require anything other than the Microsoft, and that's where the journey is going to start to evolve. Everybody's getting the user experience and customer experience right now, but everybody's looking into the possibilities of using cognitive services here. For an example, Microsoft CRM lives out in this stack. So call could come in, we could be doing a query into CRM, are they a VIP customer, and changing the routing. That can all be done at that layer whereas a lot of that used to be done on technology here. Some of that technology was expensive. It was the CapEx model of buying licenses and paying maintenance, on those types of technology. Whereas this will be more of a SaaS model from Microsoft, where you probably will pay a subscription for those sorts of services that you want there. Therefore, a lot more accessibility is going to be to some of those what seems more complex IVRs and self-service applications. It's only going to get cheaper here. The more that it's done on the mass market, and the cheaper that Microsoft makes that, the more people and appetite they'll have that, and we'll see an increase in that market as well. So there's some differences within here around this could be a video call coming into this environment. And Microsoft have technology for things like facial recognition. So we've all done the banks, my voice is my password. But the future could be that a video call comes in and we identify from the facial recognition on the camera. We're all calling from smartphones. We're calling from laptops with inbuilt cameras these days. Therefore, that ability to do a visual identification is also going to be the future there. So lots of things will evolve behind this technology, and some of them have been waiting a while for this to happen so that we can evolve it. So that story has been around for a while as well. So I was going to take you through a little bit of a demo of what that looks like now, and we'll then move on to some quick questions. Obviously, if you want a more deeper dive into the demonstration, then more than happy to run separate sessions and answer some questions. But for those that may be existing customers here, this interface might be a little bit new to you. This is actually our web client that we've been involving. We've had a hard client for a while that you could run side by side with Teams. We've been evolving a web client that you can nest inside the Teams environment that's there. And just to give everybody, if you're new to it, what we're looking at here, we've got a queue screen here where I can see the queues that I'm available to, how many calls are waiting within those queues, and how many agents are available. It's available if I click onto the agent tabs within there. We'll have, depending on sort of people's controls over that, I might be able to get summary information. I could be able to force users in and out of the system within there. So this could be both a supervisor and an agent desktop. It's just a question of expanding the security. It has all things like access to the directory, so we're already sort of using things like the Azure AD within there, so we can pull all those contacts out, so you don't have to keep updating your contact center with records. We just hook it up to the Azure AD and it will pull the directory through. And as we see, we've got the Teams presence here, just some examples of some people being away, and we've got the greens available within there. Obviously, we've got the options to call and obviously, that can be expanded out to multiple numbers, and we would always have a default number to call, but we can always select alternatives as well. We give things like agents a recent history in there as well. So it has all of the tools you'd expect from the contact center. Also has the ability to show you everything that's waiting, queuing across the system that's here, and a focus around what I'm actually working on. It can be run in an external browser if you don't like it being embedded with inside Teams and you want it as an external browser so that you've got one on one screen, one on another. And that's not a problem. Even if you're running it in Teams, you can sort of pop these elements out of Teams just by sort of right-clicking and pop the application out. Alternatively, you can just run it in a Chrome browser or an Edge browser. Any modern browser will also support the technology as well. So obviously, I've got my agent controls where I can log in, log out, and take breaks. And what I'm going to do is just pop a call into the system. We'll just take a look at how that experience looks to the agent. If you haven't seen what that would look like within a Teams environment before, we'll take a look. And if you're using SIP integration, you go, Pete, it's not that much different, then we've done a good job. So I'm just going to pop a call in from my mobile. So bear with me a second.
Thank you for calling. Please choose from the following options.
So we can see that I've got a call arriving within the system here. It's a standard Teams call. I'm getting Teams pop up to answer at that point in time. What we can actually see is this is how we can tell it's an actually true native call here. We can see the external call party in here, but we can also see that application endpoint within the system as well. So we can see that there is a silent party to the call, and this is that actual Azure bot that we were talking about is actually a party to the call. So we can actually see what it's called within here, but realistically, That's just showing how that technology is presented. Obviously, within the system here, I've got all of my controls within the agent screen here, so we'll provide plenty more information. So if I click onto the call, we can see that it was into the sales queue that I've called, how long I called in. If I want some more information, it will tell me how long I waited in the queue, what time the call came in. Obviously, you've got all of the standard things there, access to DCMF digits. So if I've made an outbound call and there's an IVR, I can pretty much attend to that as well. We've also got places to make notes within here. We've got all of our common feature set within here, things like the related tab, where we can see what is the history of this caller, who have they been talking to within the business, when did they phone in. So if that's useful information, that's all still being presented in our client layer. And obviously, I've got the option to do call wrap-ups as well. So pretty much a standard feature set for the contact center. No difference if you're an existing customer to what you're offered today. Obviously, we've built the controls in to do things like call recording within here, so I can control my recording. Do I want to pause that, or do I want to enable it? If I need to do a transfer at that point, I could go to the contact screen, but I've got an easy access to call the contacts within here and choose if I wanted to transfer through to somebody. Obviously, we've got the typical I want to go on hold or unhold the call within here. And also I've got the ability to, still transfer while on hold or talk back to somebody just to reconnect the call. And simply, it does work very similar if you're using the SIP integration to what you have. The point of contention, as I say, that we would need to do is to basically just take a look at that transfer from agent to the back office and whether or not we feel that the limitations we have currently are impeding. If they are, we can tell you which ones of those are being addressed in the August release there and make sure that we could set a timeline of when would be the right time for you to try and maybe do a POC around that, because rather than just change it for the business if you're not quite sure, quite a lot of customers will do a proof of concept, set a few things up, get some test agents, and just see that if the experience suits the business needs. We don't want to move anybody that is going to have any business impact. So hopefully it gives you a walk around the client today. And as we can see, it's quite simple, easy to understand. If you haven't seen the web client today, if you'd like a deeper look at that one, if you're an existing customer, for example, then just let us know and we can sort of look at what versions you're running and just make sure that it's something compatible, see if there might be an upgrade that possibly might be needed. But if you're looking and want to deeper dive into anything else we've seen today, then feel free to reach out. So I'm just going to pop back into the PowerPoint at the moment because I believe it's going to be time for questions now. So I'm just going to ask Dave, as Dave's been monitoring the questions as we go through. Dave, have you got any questions today?
Right, we've only got one at the moment. Anyone who's got any more, please put them through. One question we've had was, what other contact center functions can work with Microsoft Teams?
So the other sort of contact center functions that can work with Microsoft Teams is a lot of people, because the way that the voice has changed within Microsoft is everybody is very, very focused on voice. But what we have to remember is that the contact centers are been omni-channel for many, many years. So we can do things like your web chat, your email, your social media integration, IVRs, data dipping, CRM popping. None of that has really changed. We're just sort of getting that user voice experience perfected, but everything else that's there, some people have sort of forgotten about that there's more that you can do within the contact center. A lot of people interested in bots and those sorts of things, but they've sort of paused that sort of additional carrying through to offering lots of different channels through. But the other sorts of things that we can do in the Teams environment are things like call recording. So using the native APIs for call recording, which means you can put your call recorder into your Azure environment. You're using the Microsoft APIs to do the recording. You're storing everything up into Azure. So you can sort of keep that locked up and within your own environment. It's quite important to people that are FSA compliant, for example. Owning that data and having it within their own environment can be quite key. We could obviously host the boxes, but those sorts of customers want to host them themselves. So that makes it quite flexible. Obviously, we have a lot of people that are using things like call groups within the cloud, which are, if you like, hunt groups for a better term. and they want to use hunt groups. They don't really want to migrate through to a contact center, but they want a little bit more statistical information that they're getting out of the team's reports around, might be individual users, how many calls are being made, how many are being received, what direction they're being made for. There is some basic call reporting within Teams. There is an API to get more access, but it's a bit like you have to build your own. So we have a piece of software called Proteus as well that will actually enable you to do that typical call accounting if you want to do call accounting, but it also provides sort of that basic dashboard for hunt groups where you don't really want to move into a full-blown contact center. You don't feel the need for that, but you're happy with some basic hunt group functionality with some statistical reporting to back it up. So that tends to be the places of interest. The last one really to talk about is the operator console. Obviously, the front of house has been around for many, many years, and those operators, their primary job is to do the transfers. And that's why, the main driver around the sort of native integration is to get those transfers as slick for the agent experience. But to be honest, it is to get the operator console into that native environment and away from the SIP integration. So we have that offering in that space for all user groups, because we do have businesses that would be very happy to do it for the contact center, but the limitations are actually coming from the operators because that would affect their primary role. So those are the types of things that we're doing around the Teams environment: call recording, call auditing, if you like, and hunt group auditing, basic reporting, and obviously the operators as well. Any more questions coming today, guys?
Yeah, we've got a few come actually, Pete. So let's just start working through them. So currently in SIP, you answer in Teams, then do everything else in Touchpoint. You answered the native call in Teams on the demo. Is the way it's this the way it's going now? I'll give you a little rest. I'll answer something. So in that one, yes, both in the SIP implementation and the native Teams one, what you would have seen Pete do there is answer the call on the Teams client pop-up, and then all other functions are handled within the Touchpoint client. So things like call transfer, hang up, etc. Because in either case, whether it's native or SIP, what you're using the Touchpoint client to do is manipulate the conference, be that the native Teams conference or the conference on the communication center server. Where that will change going forward is with the ACS integration, it will be the Teams client embedded itself into Touchpoint, whether it's the into the client itself. Therefore, you will be in that going forward, be answering and doing all call control directly in the Touchpoint client, in the web Touchpoint client. So that will be changing with the ACS integration. The next one we've got is, can agent back office MS Teams users be recorded by EICC? Well, it's not EICC that does recording in our Teams world. We add on our quality management suite. So the quality management suite, an optional component in the overall solution, it does support Teams native recording, and that would be for all Teams users, both internal, external, contact center, etc. It's using the Teams compliance recording through the Graph API. So that can be part of the solution of recording both front office and back office users. Well, we've got quite a lot of questions. What I will just say is we probably won't get through all these questions today. So just remember, we'll mention it again in a minute, we are going to have a much more detailed question and answer session in 2 weeks' time, because I've got quite a lot of questions here. So we'll do what we can right now. Cool. Does your product offer outbound auto dialer and campaign dialer contact center feature?
Yes, we do offer an outbound campaign dialer within the EICC product. So that's typically a campaign dialer. It would be what I would class as a preview and power dialer. So normally it's for people that are going to review some notes, then click the dial to dial out, or alternatively they need a minimal amount of prep and the system will dial out for the user. The piece that we would put in a slightly different application for is more of what we would call predictive dialing, and that's where you're feeding a dialer with, you know, thousands of numbers, getting the system to dial out, and basically it will then, once connect, go through to the agent. So they're slightly different technologies. The amount of load that the predictive dialers and the calculations that they do, it runs on a separate server and it's a separate application. Because most businesses have a need for doing some outbound reach to to external parties and customers, and that tends to be more of a campaign sort of driven one. If you are a purely outbound contact center that uses predictive dialing, would have another product other than EICC, and it's capable of doing the whole predictive dialing, but it will support the inbound as well. So it really depends on whether you're that outbound, heavy driven contact center. We do have a solution for that. But most of the customers we're talking to are the inbound, and that's why we're mentioning how EICC is working currently, but the outbound is also possible.
Okay, so another question: if we migrate to native EICC, can you integrate with different PCI vendors such as Echo? Again, I'll take that one. The answer is yes, but the whole point about those is those vendors, they're upstream anyway. So they're in the PSTN network in terms of the calls are routed through their platform in the first place. And so that would be about where the call routing goes. So if, for example, you were on Microsoft call plans, that's really more of a question for Microsoft about can they do route their calls or support that type of functionality on their call plans. If you are taking it via still routing the calls through a direct routing solution or a carrier connect model, then as long as that carrier connect model and your direct routing solution could be routed through those platforms in the first place, then that DTMF tone suppression type solution would be supported. But as I say, that's pretty much an upstream function from us in that telephony world.
Yeah, and I think in my experience, Dave, I haven't found any problems with the carriers. Quite a lot of them are bringing the call to the PCI platform first, or the PCI cloud first, and then they will put a SIP trunk into the Teams environment, whether that's to your direct routing SVC or directly into your Teams cloud that's there. I haven't found any problems with it, but normally it would probably just depend on the type of carrier you're going with. But the tier ones sort of carriers that we tend to work with, yes, those have been done adequately within Teams, and we haven't experienced any problems.
Yep. Sorry, I've got them out of order now. If we start in SIP and then go to native, would the users / agents notice any difference?
We are trying to minimize any impact. As I said within the demonstration, a lot of existing customers, if they'd seen the web client before, wouldn't have noticed the difference from the agent experience. It would have felt and looked the same. The only difference would have been there's that extra party in the Teams window when I look at the Teams call being the queue bot that's there. So we're trying to make it as seamless as possible that's there. However, there are going to be some differences when features start to come into place that they might be using, like the Teams answer. Once we've done the Teams ACS API, I won't have to click answer in Teams anymore. So there will be slight changes as this evolves to the user experience. But at this point in time, there is very little functionality differences as far as how the call is delivered. The agent experience, we've got that as 100% as we can do. They both have a limitation, as we were talking about before, about the answer. The bit that we're trying to get right with the native at the moment is the ongoing transfer. So it's when that goes outside of the contact center, that's where we're having to polish the experience a little bit further using those ACS APIs.
Okay, cool.
So minimal disruption would be my sense of where they're going.
Right, I'm just going to do one more question because we're sort of in the last few minutes of the call, and I know Astrid's got a couple of things to mention before we finish. But just mention again, Astrid will be giving the details. We've got a follow-up session. We will also reach out on any questions I've not got to because we haven't got to all of them. But this last question is a really good question actually, is our Teams functionality allows call groups, agents, queuing, etc. without a contact center. So other than call recording, when would you typically want to add a Teams contact center?
To be honest, you can just add call recordings of that experience. What you'll find without the call groups is the MI data that's there. And sometimes in the call groups you run short of functionality. It does support things like I want to do a simple longest waiting. It does support things like I want to ring all users. However, call centers typically work on skills-based routing that can have a lot more complex needs. But the huge difference that you'll find between the two is the level of qualification reporting that you want around there, because you're interested in things like the SLA to answer. So if I was typically asking, okay, for your Teams call group, for example, can you tell me how many people were waiting in that call group and how long did they wait and how many abandoned? At that point, you won't be able to qualify that. Although it does the functional, it delivers the call, even with some of the reporting there, you won't drill into the level of granularity that most customer services people expect for their contact centers to qualify that reporting. But if you're happy with some base level numbers and some call groups, you could add call recording to that, and basically that would be a viable solution for you. It is always been that difference, even in the older PBX world. I could have used a hunt group with a bit of a call logger and produced almost a very, very basic contact center. But there's always that difference between a contact center is not necessarily voice. If you only need to do voice, great. But in this experience, most of the time, those customer touch points are introducing email queuing, for example. You're introducing web chat, chat bots, those type of technologies. You won't be able to build on top of those sort of call groups within the cloud. But if you have simple needs, the simpler technology is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. If you want to add a bit of call recording to it, you could even add the PCI to it. If that meets your needs, there's nothing wrong in using it. You have to use what is best for you. And there's no point investing money into a contact center if you don't need the extras. The extras would be the MI, the ability to move to the more complex skills-based routing, things like IVRs, etc. within there, and also sort of adding on, if you like, the extra experience and information for the agents. So again, nothing wrong with that. A call group in the cloud and a bit of basic reporting. It depends on your needs.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. And I'll just add to that, it's that real-time visibility that the contact center builds as what brings, as well as that historic reporting. And it's those extra things like positioning queue, estimated time to answer. As Pete says, if you've got simple requirements, then call queues could well be, Microsoft call queues could well meet your requirements. So I think at that point we've got only 2 minutes left. Just to give hand back for just a couple of points from Astrid before we finish.
Thank you both. Yeah, since we are at the end of the webinar, I would like to make you aware of this guide. So if you wanted to read up a little bit more on the subject, I recommend this guide. It's called The Connected Contact Center, Native Integration with Microsoft Teams. Also, just a little reminder, our second Microsoft Teams Tech Clinic takes place in 2 weeks' time on Thursday, the 25th of May, also at 11 o'clock. And as we've mentioned before, that will be a live Q&A session where Pete and Dave answer your questions about integrating a contact center with Microsoft Teams. I will include the registration link as well as the link to the guide in my follow-up email if you haven't registered already. And also, if you have any more questions that you think of, maybe perhaps now that you've seen the demonstration today, then please email the email address you can see there, or you can email me directly. We will compile all the questions and see if we can answer them in the session in 2 weeks' time, or we respond to you directly. Yeah, so all that is left for me to do now is a huge thank you to Pete and Dave for this interesting presentation. There was a wealth of information, a lot of technical details. It's been a real pleasure listening to you and following the demonstration. Thank you to our audience as well for joining us today. I hope you found it useful. Enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.
Thanks all for your time.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.